there, it's KSteve of KStevMath. I have a topic I'd like to discuss with you. You being parents or math teachers or math students or whoever you might be. There actually could be other audiences as well that could benefit from this. But what I want to talk about is how we learn math and kind of some of the things that I've learned over the years with teaching, as well as what I learned whenever I went back and had to be a student for my master's degree. All those experiences combined have led me to believe what I now believe about learning math. And there are certainly studies out there and lots of information about best practices, and my hope would be that this aligns with all of those. So I do want to talk, though, especially to parents who maybe are in a new space where they're homeschooling, or maybe your first kid has gotten up to an age that they're starting to struggle with math, or maybe it's even that you're scared because you didn't do well at math and now you're like, what am I supposed to do? Got a 2-year-old and they're counting all the time and it just drives me crazy, or things like that. Hopefully that's not actually a thing, but hopefully there's some good information here for all of those situations. So first off, I am kind of talking more to middle school and high school more so than elementary school, just because I'm not an elementary math expert. I would love to say that I am, but I'm not. I do think that there are some similarities, though, in how we learn. So there's kind of a process that I think we go through that best helps us learn how to do new math skills. The first thing that we need to do is we need to watch somebody do the problem themselves, and preferably that person will also have enough knowledge to give us context for the problem, give us the why as well as the how. But for a lot of students, especially depending on how old they are in a particular class, some of those details just they might not be ready for. So it's important to be able to know as much as possible, but just know that you don't have to know everything just to be able to solve an equation. So if solving equations is what you're trying to teach to a student, you need to show them examples of how to do it. A funny thing that that happened to me, I feel like it happened in middle school more so than high school when I was teaching, is I actually developed a thing where I would say, okay, I want you to watch this example and I just want you to try to take it in, because you don't know how to do this yet. This is me teaching you how to do it. And it took me by surprise that I started having to say that, because I thought that was something that was fairly obvious, that until you've seen it, why would you know how to do it? But partially because of how our math curriculums tend to spiral so that you see things later that you've already done, and I think partially just kids who get used to picking up on things fast, it can be uncomfortable whenever a teacher starts working through something and the student isn't able to guess where it's going, or doesn't understand why it is that it is the way it is. Sometimes you can say, well, here's why we're doing it this way, and then there are other times where it's like, this is the process, this is what I'm teaching you. We solve equations by doing these things, and yes, there's a why and a how, and that's great, but also part of it is learning a process. So watching examples, making sure that the student understands, hey, it's okay if you don't know how to do it before the example. That's the whole point. Even saying it's okay if you don't know how to do it after I've gone through it once. That's fine too. Sometimes it takes more than one example. So first step is the student needs to watch someone do it, preferably someone who's good at explaining, who has an idea of like the common mistakes and that sort of thing. Somebody who doesn't leave steps out unnecessarily, where if you're teaching somebody in Algebra 1 how to do things, you don't want to skip all the basic steps because they're still a fairly young math student. The next thing is, sometimes this goes hand in hand with examples. Students need to do guided practice. They need to do problems where someone is right there helping them. And this is kind of the idea of of needing reassurance. It's the idea of, this is what I think I'm supposed to do, but if it's not right, I need to know that instead of doing the whole problem wrong and then finding out that it wasn't what I was supposed to do. So there's an important part where we have guided practice that can be super helpful. So like I said, sometimes this goes hand in hand with examples. My first examples in a class tend to be, I want you more paying attention to the process, whereas I try to have enough examples so that the later ones are a lot more like guided practice. I also try to gauge my students to say, okay, you guys seem like you've got the hang of it. I want you to try this example, and I'm going to walk around and try to catch up those who maybe aren't getting it as fast. But on the other side of that, if you, like me, as a teacher or even as a parent, you're like, okay, I'm going to stick by you and be here when you start the homework, whatever our worksheet or practice problems are, and I'm going to double check that you get the first couple right so that you know that you're doing it right. Because usually if someone just hasn't absorbed the lecture or has something wrong in their head, usually shows up within the first couple problems. So I actually would memorize the answer to the first couple problems on a homework set, and as I'm walking around helping, I would purposefully look at those problems and see who was stuck or who needed more instruction or things like that. So there's two kind of places you can put guided practice where it doesn't have to be a separate thing, but also you could just say, okay, right now we're going to do guided practice. So that could be guided as a group. It could be guided, whole group like class, or it could be guided just as a smaller group, like partners or things like that. So, and kids, I've found, especially in middle school, but I think on it into high school, kids like that idea of, oh, you're giving me a chance to prove what I know or what I don't know, where there's no real consequence if they fail. And especially making it where it's, you don't target somebody for not getting the answer, you don't make them feel like they're the only one who didn't get it. That's not helpful. So you get a chance to kind of reward the kids who do know it and did get it really fast, while also being able to hopefully spot who needs more help. After guided practice needs to be independent practice. And this is the thing that can be really tricky, especially if you are a teacher and end up helping students through a homework assignment, or as a parent you help your student with the homework assignment. If you've helped on every single problem on their assignment, they have not done enough. And as a math teacher, it's not necessarily my job to assign the max number of problems that I think it will take for somebody to get it. I shoot for a middle. So there are kids who will get it within a couple problems of independent practice. There are kids who need 20 problems of practice before they get it, because each time they've done a problem with you, they've learned more about what's going on. And so it's up to you as a teacher or parent or student to say, I didn't do a single one of these problems by myself, so I clearly don't have it. Where can I find more problems? So an easy place to look is your textbook. Very few teachers assign every single problem in the textbook. It can be helpful just to wait a couple hours and then redo the homework assignment, unless you have a crazy memory where you just would automatically remember what you did, which if you do, good job for you. But surely there, if you leave some time, you can just redo what you did, or you can hop on the internet, or your parents can, and probably find some problems that way. It's really important through independent practice as much as possible to know if you're doing it right, which is weird because it's like, well, it's independent practice. So I do a thing with homework where I encourage students to look at the odd problems in the back of the book to check that they're right, not to copy, but to check to see if they're right. I will often have my teacher's manual up where if they want to just go look and see if they got the answer right, they can. Or on worksheets, I'll have a key available so that if they want to check their answers, they can. Because it does very little good to practice a math problem incorrectly and to not know that you did it incorrectly. Now, every now and let's be honest, most of the mistakes made in math tend to be little things, and so it may not be the end of the world. Maybe every single problem is wrong on your homework, and it's just because you all of a sudden decided 2 times 3 was 5, and every problem had 2 times 3, and every time you put 5. So you got the wrong answer every time, but everything else was right. Then you know what? You probably got the hang of the concept, assuming it wasn't multiplication. But it would be better if after the first problem you checked your answer, went back to figure out what was wrong, and realized your mistake so that you didn't make it anymore. It reminds me of, there's the saying, practice makes perfect. And then if you've been a part of a team sport at some point, you may have been told snarkily by a coach. Mine was snarky, I think about it, that it's not practice that makes perfect, it's perfect practice that makes perfect. Actually, maybe it was a music teacher that told me that. That it matters how you practice. If you are practicing for basketball, if you're practicing the trumpet and you're playing incorrectly, that practice hasn't helped you, and especially in music, and probably in everything. Like, if I practice over and over wrong, that's going to be what's stuck in my head, and it's going to be really hard to correct that. So the same is true in math. We need to practice it with the right method. And the only way to know that we're doing it right is either to have somebody right beside us watching us, which is an option, or to have the answer to check at the end. So the next step is kind of a weird step. This, I think, is what tends to separate our students from feeling like they're good at math and not good at math. And I do think that it's something that anyone can get better at just by realizing that it's something they need to work on. And that is internalizing the rules and methods of math. So what I mean by that is, whenever we start learning to count, we initially, it usually happens so young that most of us probably don't remember it, but initially, you're having to be reminded of, 13 is an actual number that you need to put in there. It's not 14 twice or things like that. But eventually, you internalize those numbers so that you're not really even having to think about the fact that you've memorized the numbers. You just, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and so on. My 3-year-old has had a lot of trouble with holding up individual fingers for counting, and very recently has started getting it, and just the look on his face as he focuses on 1, 2, 3 and is counting is mind-blowing, because it's like, you're getting it, you're learning something. That was kind of a side note, but when we're young, we don't realize we're doing it, but we're doing a really good job of internalizing the way the world works. And it's once we get to older we're older and doing math topics that just aren't as easy to internalize, that we start to struggle. And it's going to take some more work to do it, but part of that has to do with the practice and saying, okay, this is how we solve an equation. What's the why behind it? What's the how behind it? Why am I allowed to do this but not this? And consistently understanding what you are or aren't allowed to do. And that way, the next time something new comes up, you hopefully can make an educated guess about how it's going to work. Because there's so many things in math that end up being similar. Once you know the rules for something less complicated, you can apply it to things that are more complicated. It's really neat like that. So if you can internalize those things so that you're not just guessing at what to do, that is super duper helpful. And I think anybody can do that if they're given kind of a chance to actually say, okay, how is this working? An example of when I remember doing this myself is with my calculator. So it can be a little tricky to type things into the calculator sometime, because you may think you're being clear about what you want the calculator to do. The calculator is programmed a certain way, so it may think you meant something else entirely. And so I remember in high school, if there was something I wasn't sure that I had put into the calculator right, I would try it different ways to see if I got the same answer. So I'd try it once with parentheses and see the answer, and try it without a parentheses. And if it gave me the same answer, well, those parentheses didn't need to be there. But if it gave me different answers, then the parentheses must have been important. So it's this idea of going through and testing things to see if they work. It's a little trickier when it's not a calculator like that. So it means you may need to ask your teacher or your parent or someone. You might need to say, hey, does this work the way I think it does? Do I add 3 to each side because 3 is the best number ever, or do I add 3 to each side because of that -3? That kind of thing. That's not a great example, but that kind of thing of saying, does this work because I think it is? Like every now and then example problems will be like, well, if you just divide those two numbers, you get the answer. Well, is that actually how it works, or is that just a coincidence? Things like that is what we kind of want to look at. And then finally, the thing that is helpful is being able to check progress. And so this is the idea that, okay, you've watched somebody do it. You've had them help you do it. You've now done it by yourself. But can you step back for a day or so and then be asked to do a problem and still know how to do it? And that's where the concept of quizzing and testing and things like that kind of comes in the education world, that we have to actually be able to be like, okay, you did it, you've learned it, but can you actually show that you know it? And so this is something that has caused me to develop what I like to call quick checks. And this can be a super difficult thing to do as a teacher if you are, teaching 30 kids in a class and 5 of those classes. It may be really tricky to do something like this, but the idea behind a quick check is to take a concept like solving an equation with a quadratic formula and say, okay, I'm going to give you either 1 or 2 problems on doing this, and everybody in the class is going to get different problems, or maybe you have 5 different sets of the same quiz so that you don't have to be as nervous about cheaters and things like that. So you give it out and you say, okay, you either make a 0, a 50, or a 100 if there's 2 problems. No partial credit. You either know how to do this or you don't. But you also give the stipulation that they can retake it as many times as they want. So what this does is it encourages them to keep trying. Nobody wants a 0 on a quiz. Nobody wants a 50 on a quiz or a quick check or whatever it might be, especially if you know that if you just keep doing it, you can get 100. Now, if you don't have very motivated students, this can backfire, of course, that maybe they're like, I'm happy with a 50, I'm happy with a 0, it's whatever. But for the most part, the kids are going to really, really want that 100, because normally 100s on quizzes and tests in math are hard to get because there's so many little mistakes. And I will, if it's something difficult like the quadratic formula where a lot of mistakes can happen, I will, after kind of the first attempt, look at what they've got and say, I know that the second one isn't right. Would you like to go see if you can find your mistake? And if they can, then I'll still count it. So there's different ways that you can adapt this idea, but it's something that I think has been super helpful. In some ways more helpful than just standard quizzing or testing, because it's this idea of, hey, I just need you to know this one thing. Okay, and I want you to prove you know it, and it's very straightforward. I think we get too caught up with quizzing and testing on know all the things. Do you know all of them? I've taught you all these things. Do you know them all? Whereas, we're building these math skills. We're trying to internalize them. How do we know if they're internalized if we aren't checking, hey, do you have this? Hey, do you have this? So it would be the idea of quick checking more often, every couple of lessons or so that you can actually see how your students are doing. Like I said, that's going to be super difficult if you've got a lot of students, because even grading 2 problems, if you've got 150 students, is not an easy task to do. So finding a way to automate it would obviously help, or finding a way to have them, grade themselves where you feel like you can trust them, that would help. But if you have a small class, or if you're a parent, this is definitely something that I think is achievable. And speaking to parents and a little bit to teachers, just know that your attitude as you're helping with math, any anxiety you're bringing into it because of your own feelings about math, definitely can contribute to how your kids are feeling. So I know it can be super tough to be excited about things that you're not excited about, but I hope that you'll try to be as excited as possible as you're trying to teach your students math or work with them on their math, even if it's that you're just they're going to school and then coming home and you're helping them with homework. It can be a frustrating experience for everybody. And so the better your attitude, hopefully the better their attitude will be. But also know that it's pretty normal to end up being frustrated with math homework as a parent and as a student. And I like to tell my kids, if you've been stuck for 10 minutes on a problem, it's time to do something else. If you haven't gotten it after 10 minutes of really good trying, you're probably not going to get it. So send an email to your teacher, a friend, somebody who might be able to help you with it, or sending an email to the teacher just to let them know, hey, I didn't get it. Can I come in and get more help, or can we talk about it in class, or things like that. Communication can be super helpful in that way. All right, well, that is my advice on how to teach math or how to learn math, depending on your perspective, since I think homeschooling, as well as just helping kids at home with their math, is going to be super important over the next indefinite period of time. I wanted to throw these things out here so that hopefully you can help your student out a lot with what they're doing. I have a website, KStevMath, without the extra E, KStevMath.com, and I'm putting resources up every day to try to help you teach your kids math, or to help your kids learn math. And so please check that out and let me know what you think, and I'll see you in another video. Thanks.